Are you wanting to take your notes and all the information you have and, really get more out of it? Well, that's kind of the idea behind calling it your mind garden. And it's something I first heard about a few years ago, and I want to share how I do this and what I've had to do or what I've implemented to make this work for me and to get better results. Because at the end of the day, if you're just dumping notes somewhere and you never really use them, or you never go back over them, or you just never see them again, then you're not going to get as much out of this as you could. So let's jump into that. Hey, I'm Adam with the Productivity Academy. If you're into information about this, personal knowledge management, automation, productivity, then you are in the right place. Go ahead and subscribe, stay up to date with videos. All right, so let's do a little bit of background on Mind Garden just to make sure we're on the same page. So I personally came across this a while ago. I was reading an article by Anne-Laure Lecomte at Nest Labs, and she talked about using the term, or she used the term Mind Garden. Has a great article. I'll include it down in the link below. And she goes into more detail about a lot of, how this can work and the process of taking notes. But I want to talk specifically about if we have notes already, where do we kind of go from there? And like I mentioned in the introduction, if you just take notes and you're just dumping them somewhere, generally you're not going to get as much value out of that. I'm not going to tell you not to do that because I think that it's still good to take in notes. But then to make sure that you do some sort of review and you're reconnecting these ideas or refreshing your mind with these ideas that you thought were important enough to take in the first place. So basically what I've done was I realized I wasn't going back and seeing some of these notes I'd taken, these articles I thought would be important. And while I'm a believer in, that's okay to a certain degree, there's some randomness I would like to do. So randomized resurfacing. There's some review I would like to do of what I took over the week because maybe it really was important, but by the time it's been 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, it's already off the radar, and maybe I wanted to add a tag to it just to connect it to something, or it was important enough that later down the line, I might need it in 3 months, but if I didn't have it attached to anything, it wouldn't really make sense. So that's kind of how I approached this when I realized I had kind of a gap. And I decided to set up a literal time in my calendar to tend my mind garden. And literally all this is I put in a calendar event. For me, it was on a Friday. I tend to structure my week so that things are a little bit easier, less hectic as the week goes on, right? My mental energy can wane over time, so I have more time available. And what I did was on Friday morning, I set a 30-minute block. I have a link to go in, and what I have set up is my notes going into Rome Research, and anything that is new and I haven't reviewed has a tag called inbox, and I go in and I can just go to that tag and see everything that's been added. And just to be upfront about this, I do not get through everything. I do not go to some sort of Rome inbox 0, but it's just my time I have set aside to go through and say, hey, what were the impactful things that I read this week, or that I had put into my notes? And what do I want to do? Is there a thought about how this might be helpful in the future? I have a tag for that. Is there a connection to something else? Did I take a note, using Readwise while I was annotating this that I want to connect it to something else later, another article, something else in Rome? Is there a book I finished reading that I need to write some notes on in kind of the same manner? And again, it's only 30 minutes, and it's not something that I hold myself to, as like a hard goal every week. If I have the time, I do it. But it's like a garden, right? You could maybe miss tending or, tearing out weeds or something occasionally, but if you just never do it, your garden becomes overrun and it's not really a garden. So kind of the same thing I feel with my mind garden, where I go back through my notes, I go through this information, and over time it becomes more valuable and I don't have to spend a ton of time. It's just a little bit of consistent work and touching those kind of high quality, high value notes, articles, whatever they might be. Now, something else that I think is important enough to mention about this is to also, during this time or throughout your week, but definitely maybe writing a note if you put in a calendar event, hey, tend your mind garden, here's where I go, here's what I do, right? Make it easy on yourself. But also curate your sources. Don't feel, scared about removing a source. Maybe, again, I'm a heavy user of Readwise Reader. But, if you're using a feed reader or you're just gathering information from different sources, it's easier nowadays, of course, than ever to bring in sources of information. If you feel like you're no longer reading it, using it, it's not high quality, go ahead and remove it, right? I consider that part of this, tending your garden. Add sources to it. But, don't be afraid to trim. You can always go back and re-add it, especially if you're using something like this, like a Readwise Reader. If you're taking notes in Notion and Roam, these are being saved somewhere. If you're like, man, I really like this person's articles, it's not going to be difficult to go back and, resubscribe or add their RSS feed again. And a little bit of tending goes a long way so that you keep your sources, to a higher signal to noise ratio. And I'm at the same time, I'm a big fan of having a lot of information coming in and then just picking and choosing what I want. But over time, those sources may not become as relevant based on either it's changed or maybe your interests have changed. So don't feel bad about that. Keep things cleaned up occasionally. If you're not reading a source, take it out of there so that you can focus more on the things that you're getting a lot of value out of. So wanted to share that. I think it's a great way to do it. Again, going in, setting up some time, maybe once a week, I think is enough. And going through and tending your mind garden, making sure you're making those connections, you're reviewing that high quality information, and then you're tending to your sources as well can really help you out, help you maintain those connections, build the connections, and just enjoy having that information available to you so that you can make all of this into something more valuable and interesting. And honestly, it's fun to have a little bit of that randomized resurfacing where you see things over time where you're like, oh, right, I remember that. This was really interesting. I'm glad I reviewed this, and making those kind of mental connections. If you have any questions or comments about this, please leave a comment. I'll get back to you. Thanks.